So I will call the Groton Complete Streets Working Group meeting to order. Thank you to everyone for being a part of our working group. I believe we have all familiar faces with the exception of one. Hal Zod, our newest member of the working group. I believe he is our liaison, if you will, or member designee from the Planning and Zoning Commission. So thank you, Hal, for joining us. If you have any words, you're welcome to share them.
I have no words, but thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you.
I'll have words later.
All right.
I hope so.
Excellent. We look forward to it, Hal. Thanks for supporting our efforts. Just going through the agenda again. This is a very informal group. Really no agendas or meeting minutes. We did create one, and thank you, Brian, for assisting in that. Just to keep us focused during this meeting. But if we want to review our previous meeting, maybe Brian, do you want to take the lead on that?
Okay, so I think 2 weeks ago we met, and it was really an introduction to the topic, and it was an opportunity for the interested stakeholders and council.
Brian, we're having trouble hearing you.
How about this? Is that better?
Yes.
All right. Okay, so last meeting 2 weeks ago was to just to start the process of considering how the town can transition into a more complete streets-oriented transportation process. And we just talked in generalities really about developing a policy and how we would be representational of the different constituencies in the town and kind of what some of the opportunities are. So that really was the gist of it, just for the folks that tended to meet each other if they didn't know each other already, and everybody introduced themselves and explained their interest, and then we talked about how to move forward. And the steps moving forward involve developing a complete street policy, which is in process now. Having an overall master plan for the community, which has, I think, in the interim between that meeting and this meeting, perhaps has been approved for funding. And then, Mark, you can just show us affirmative if that's correct. I think.
Yes,
I think we have. Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's there's like three principal legs of the stool here. There's the policy, there's an overall master plan, and then there's funding, to implement. And so we've got at least two of them in the work. And the funding is always just something that develops. It's a space and opportunity and kind of the momentum that builds when this kind of project gets underway. So that's really what we did last week. And I think what we're really interested in, and what everyone here may be interested in, is where do we go next, and how, who, when a committee of some sort would be formalized. And I guess that's the next item on the agenda, is talk about here, what would be the composition of a complete streets committee? Are we the complete streets committee here tonight? Are there other stakeholders that should be invited? How would the group be appointed, and who would do the appointing? And then what would the bylaws and that sort of thing more or less look like? Are there town committees in place, working groups, whatever fits the description best, already in existence that could serve as a model for this group? So I'm going to stop there and let those of you who have more experience with the town and the way these organizations are formed and how they operate take over.
So I have a comment.
So the Complete Streets Committee, I kind of reviewed your draft policy, and it seems like they're the ones who are going to be reviewing transportation projects to see whether or not they comply with the policy. Is that the idea here? If it is, it probably should be a fairly small group with some technical expertise.
Yeah. So the question, I guess, would be to what level of detail would a Complete Streets group get involved in the transportation minutia project? And I agree that for it to function efficiently and for it to be able to interface with public works efficiently, it needs to be relatively small and have expertise. I think that is the typical Complete Streets committee in a community. It's folks who speak the language of transportation and who can listen and understand what they're being told by engineering and by the economic people that frame the transportation project in, you know, the requirements of the municipality, because we can't just do everything. We have to be prudent and responsible.
So it kind of actually surprised me when you started to take this direction of having another governance body to be watching over this particular asset, because at first glance, I would say if we did our job really well, we would come up with a decent way forward and documentation and direction, so that every time Greg digs up a street, he knows what he should be doing and should have a presentation saying, here's how we'll put it back together again. You don't put it back together again the way it was. That's how we all got in this mess. Every time you dig up a street, you put it back better. But in terms of having some documentation that says, well, where do we go from here? I'm not quite sure. It's good to have yet another layer of stuff on top of people looking at these things, except maybe to see that we got it right. And I'm just saying, I don't want to empower or even give the Planning and Zoning Commission any more to do, thank you, but it certainly dovetails with what we do. Every time you change a lane or something, we end up getting involved. But it definitely is, as Deb was saying, it's people who are really expert at this. This is traffic engineering we're talking about. So we have the background is definitely there. We don't need to invent anything. So all we need to do is come up with how are we going to go forward with it. And certainly there's different layers. Are we just going to do paint, or are we just going to have a separate lane, or all the different things we can do? And it seems like we should be able to come up with something. And here's what you do. And if you can't do that, then you do this. If you can't do that, you do this, and take it from there.
So I think we've been talking about a fairly limited activity of this proposed committee when we talk about interfacing with public works and transportation. But that's not all it is capable of doing, and that's not the only benefit. So other things that a committee like this can do for the town is it can be an advocate for complete streets and for safety and for educational programs and activities. So its purpose wouldn't just be to review capital improvement projects by Public Works. It would also be to seek grant money and other kinds of funding for pedestrian and bicycle improvements, pursue designation of Groton as a bicycle-friendly community, to promote safety programs, coordinate with adjacent municipalities like Stonington and Ledger, Council of Governments, state agencies. I mean, the committee can do things that are a little bit outside of the day-to-day, operations of Public Works that can really bring more attention attention and more emphasis and more, I think, representation to the town by just being nimble and motivated to be more of a support than simply just a reviewing group.
I think it would be more clear what this committee will be doing once we kind of get the policy together. So maybe this is a little too soon to talk about who should be on it, you know, until we actually see what the committee will be doing and what the policy says we're going to do going forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think we should talk about generally who would be represented here. And we know that Public Works, of course, is the central player here. And planning, of course, is very important. And the town manager's office the town manager shares local traffic authority with the police chief. And from what I observe here in Groton, really town manager appears to take on the vast majority of traffic authority responsibility. That's simply my view looking in. But I think that the police chief also has a role to play in terms of just commenting on some of these issues that have to do with using the roadways. We certainly need a representative from the health and wellness field, and we need representatives from Planning and Zoning Commission. We've had, and we have tonight, a representative from Conservation. I think we kind of have the bones here to begin with of who would be represented, regardless of what the narrow scope turns out to be.
Cindy's there raising her hand.
Yes, Cindy.
Go ahead.
Hi, Hal. I don't think we've met. I think that, Brian, you put together a great PowerPoint presentation on complete streets because it is kind of this large thing that we're going to try to get our hands around. It's not just transportation. It's really how people move in a coordinated, safe and healthy way in the community. And I like how you put that we need a multidisciplinary team, because it really is a process of looking at projects in the community, how people move of all ages, of all abilities, and all different modes of transportation, and looking at those projects through various lenses. So the lens of recreation, the lens of health, the lens of safety, the lens of planning and zoning, you know, so it's really a multidisciplinary team that can come together using whatever matrix we decide to adopt for the town in a coordinated fashion and also in a consistent way. Perhaps reviewing that matrix every couple of years to make sure it still meets what, you know, the transportation and safety boards say is best practices. But I think we do need another layer, and I think that's what's being proposed, that it will be a policy, but it will be another layer. It will be a team of professionals who have really sunken their teeth into this subject, who can come together on whatever, you know, basis is chosen, whether it's a monthly meeting, whether it's, you know, there's ad hoc or a task force attached to it for special projects. I think that infrastructure and the governance is something that needs to be decided. Is this part of, and I don't know the language, but is this part of the town charter? Is this a formal commission? Is this a subcommittee? So I think that has to be decided. Where does this fit into the existing body of governance? And then think about, how do we want to view these projects? Through which lens is important? And I think that will give us the departments or the organizations that we really feel could make a contribution to this effort. Maybe it's somebody from the COG, maybe it's somebody from DOT, maybe it's, you know, I don't know. But I think that that's kind of why we're meeting, to hash out the who and also the what, and then ultimately the where. Where does this fit into the existing governance structure?
Thank you, Cindy.
Did I understand that you mentioned that there's a master plan? Is there really a master plan, or is that, no, it's not really a master plan. What is there?
So there is not at this point a master plan that's current at all. There's a plan from 2005 that's very outdated, but and Mark Berry can talk to this, the funding has been approved for what's being called a community connectivity plan. And that plan, and Mark, if you're prepared to describe it, why don't you take over? But I do have a description of it that I can read as well.
Okay, so it was over a year ago, I worked with the COG on putting together a proposal to try to get grant money for a community connectivity plan. And unfortunately didn't get the grant, but we were able through the budget process this year to get the money to fund a community connectivity study. And it is going to include, the proposed scope of work included three different areas. One obviously is public outreach. Two was a bike and pedestrian master plan, and then also a complete streets plan based on the complete streets policy that gets developed. And there's a number of components within each one of those, inventorying existing facilities, kind of going beyond just options, connectivity options along roads, but looking at sidewalks and trails, kind of coming up with a 10-year capital plan, identifying priorities, and developing standards for retrofits, standards for new streets. So there's a lot of pieces to what was proposed for this particular project.
So when you're saying we said master plan, but that was just the plan of the things that we need to do. Besides, we don't actually have a plan the way the rest of us in the construction side think of a plan. This is just a plan forward kind of thing. So we're saying, or do you actually have a map of here's the streets we want to improve, and here's something with lines and arrows that's an overlay?
No, that would be part of this project.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, but the council also appropriated some funds to revamp our bicycle and pedestrian study.
Yeah, we've kind of renamed that just the community connectivity, but essentially it's, yes, it would be doing the work that was done in 2005. And I think also, taking that a step further and adding more components to what was done in 2005.
And just quickly, Mark, you may want to distinguish that community connectivity study from some of the other community connectivity grants or efforts that are underway, because there may be some confusion just from that.
Sure. So we did get a community connectivity grant from the state last year, and that's for a specific project to put a bike path from Route 1 through Sutton Park out to Midway Oval. And that would be, I think it's a 10-foot wide paved path. And then once you get onto Midway Oval, it's on-street, signage and painting from Midway Oval all the way around to, I can't think of which court it is, but it's where the trolley trail ends now.
Oh, it's Knoxville.
Knoxville, thanks. So Knoxville Court, and then we're also, Public Works is going to go from Knoxville Court over to Industrial Drive. I'm not sure if that project has started yet, but it's supposed to be taking place pretty soon. Continuing that path over to Industrial Drive, and then restriping Industrial Drive all the way down to Depot Road and putting signage on Depot Road. So essentially, we'll have almost a complete loop with the exception of just in front of Town Hall, kind of where the multi-use path ends right by the community center, over to Depot Road. There'd just be that one little section that we didn't have any type of a bike path or on-street markings.
Cindy, you have your hand raised? Excellent. Now, I know we jumped ahead a little bit to the Complete Streets Committee. You know, I would note this isn't a finalized, you know, proposal. The draft policy is sort of in flux. I know Brian had sent over some language already to both Deb Jones and Greg Hanover. And I understand our town manager has looked at some of the language as well, providing some feedback on kind of what you know, some of charter related issues that may hinder, I shouldn't say hinder, but prevent certain you know, policies from taking place. Case in point, you know, we cannot dictate, you know, to town staff how, actually, I'll just pull up the email from John directly, so I don't paraphrase him. But yeah, I'll pull it up. I apologize. But long short of it, I know Brian, what, you know, when he's already, as I mentioned, sent over that policy, and once we get that finalized feedback from town staff, we'll then disseminate it amongst the entire committee to take a look at and provide our feedback on before, you know, we vote to endorse any policy and you know, to advance it to the council for their review.
That sounds about right. You know, we I'd asked the principal players here to take a look at this draft policy and to give input, and then the end result is to arrive at consensus that everyone agrees with and is comfortable with, and then I think at that point it can be disseminated. But I will say that the policy and the master plan, the community connectivity plan and its various parts really work hand in hand, and that they allow for a group of volunteers like this committee to help follow through on the recommendations of the master plan. Because these master plans end up being, you know, hundreds of pages, lots of maps, and if there's not a dedicated team that is keeping tabs on the recommendations and matching those recommendations with the schedules and the long range requirements and schedules of the town, they often get overlooked. And we're also, this committee would also be looking at you know, inter-town opportunities. Like, for example, the Eastern Shoreline Path, which is a multi-town facility that's been proposed, that is being worked on at the state level by DOT and by the State Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Board, to develop a route of on-street and off-street bike facilities from the Rhode Island border all the way through the region to the Connecticut River. And that's the sort of initiative that, you know, that really transcends town boundaries, and the Complete Streets Committee would certainly be positioned to you know, to interface with our neighbors and with the state agencies that are involved. So there's a lot of value in my opinion, to putting the master plan and a committee together so that they help advance the goals and recommendations of the plan. And I think we're at an opportunity, we're really at a crossroads where we can make a big impact in this area. And in my experience, the more successful communities in Connecticut that have been implementing complete streets improvements and been receiving the bulk of grant funds have had this relationship. They have a strong plan. They have a committee. They have stakeholders, and they have a town or municipal government that is enthusiastic about implementing the recommendations. And I can tell you that I've received from one of these communities, the public works director has volunteered to speak to our group. This is from Portland, Connecticut. So if the group would be interested in hearing from Mr. Shea in Portland, I can invite him to just give us a brief description of how this has worked out in his community, which has been working from a policy and a master plan for the past 5 years.
Thank you, Brian. I think that would be certainly a value. I recall attending, maybe it was a bicycle and pedestrian summit, a virtual summit sometime last year. And I remember he provided a presentation and it was very informative. Learning obviously best practices from a community that's already done it. So I'd certainly support that. And mentioning earlier about the town manager and some of his feedback on the draft proposal so far, just making it clear that, in the policy that for routine maintenance, for example, they don't have to come to the committee for approvals. That if that were required, that actually, be in violation of our town charter. Certainly I think this group can function in more advisory capacity, but we wouldn't have the authority to establish a committee where they would, whenever Greg is doing routine maintenance or doing repairs on a street, that they would be forced to, or require approval from that body. But I do think it would be of value to have an advisory group that would provide inputs on major infrastructure improvements and road diets, case in point. And Patrice mentioned this at our last meeting, but several years ago, the town resurfaced Thomas Road, which is the road connecting the city of Groton to the town, going over Baker's Cove. And it was, I believe, a road diet. They were able to reduce the size of some of the travel lanes, but they also accommodated two bike lanes on both sides of the road, which I think is a value. And I kind of foresee an advisory committee, if we're doing projects like that, to be a group where certainly Greg or town staff or the public works team who are doing the roads resurfacing come to this committee for input or some ideas about ways to to make bicycle and pedestrian improvements, and especially safety improvements. I think that pretty much covers everything that I had for the committee, unless anybody else has something to say.
I think I like the idea
Let's
that,
move on to the next item.
okay.
Go ahead, Hal.
I was just going to just throw something out here. It's pretty much an agreement, but just make sure we don't lose view of it first. One thing we can't do is add an approval process to Public Works. But we could, if we can take a look at what's happening before it happens as an advisory, those are two different things. And that could be very handy. And I say that just because that was kind of my familiarity with doing work at Subbase. The worst problems were when somebody dug something up, and the Navy likes to put things back exactly the way they were because it's easy and you paint it white. And our best successes where we just said, hey, same amount of asphalt, same amount of paint, but we can do it better. And that's something that is only advisory. we couldn't tell them what to do. In fact, very often it was utilities that was doing it. So we had no power at all, but we just say, look, here's a better, sometimes even cheaper, but always more safe way to put it back together. And I don't know if you've been in subways for over the last 25 years, but it's better now just by making that a practice of not mandating anything, but just having a review, knowing what was coming. So we could just throw it out there saying, please don't put it back exactly the way it was. Maybe you could just add X, add the lane, add a crosswalk in the right place rather than where it was because in 1940 there was a building someplace. Yes, we did a lot of that too.
Well put.
That's really good input, Hal. I'm glad you mentioned that because it also brings up the fact that the State Department of Transportation, owns several of the major corridors in the town of Groton. And these are corridors used not just by automobiles and trucks, they're also used by cyclists and pedestrians and transit. And the approach of DOT to towns that don't have any kind of complete streets policy or activity has generally been not to even bring it up and to continue business as usual, repaving exactly in the same condition as the existing conditions. And in my interactions with DOT through the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Board at the state level, we've been told that sometimes the state has been told by towns not to make an improvement because the town just doesn't want to have to deal with bicycles on the roads or any of these issues that we're concerned with. So they tend to shy away from complete street activities in places where there is no complete streets policy or no complete streets interest. To their credit, they have been doing a lot of great safety upgrades, mostly at intersections. You've noticed in Groton, improved crosswalks, curb ramps, signalization for pedestrian phases and that sort of thing. But when it comes to complete streets, if the community has a strong complete streets policy and a plan, DOT is more interested in cooperating and interacting. And I've heard this directly from DOT staff that they would appreciate more towns adopting complete street policies and master plans. They can't force any town to do this or any city to do this, but the direction that state is moving is towards a more holistic complete street philosophy. They're currently rewriting their complete street policy themselves and looking at what other states have done and are planning to change the policy that DOT works with. So having a policy here, having a master plan, having a better relationship with the local district managers and letting the state level engineering and planning at the state DOT headquarters know that Groton is on the path towards a more holistic approach to transportation will benefit us greatly, and it will enhance our position in grant funds and priorities when it comes to what DOT is doing. So that often gets overlooked, and many communities want to stay as far from DOT as possible because of the red tape and the bureaucracy. But it's not the same old department that it used to be, from what I can tell. So that's just a whole nother dimension of this that we haven't talked about yet, but that I think is very important to know about. Now, if we want to segue into funding, there was an article in the Day that Andre noticed and distributed. I think all of you received that. It was an AP article that the Day picked up, and it was reporting on the Federal Highway Administration's recent authorization of something like $5 billion for the program Safe Streets for All, that's SS4A, and it's really directed at communities. So it's not money that goes to the state DOT that then is parsed out to the communities based on, a request to DOT. It doesn't appear to be going to the COG, to the MPOs, the Metropolitan Planning Organizations, Council of Governments. It apparently is being directed straight to communities that have their what are called safety plans in place. Now, Groton doesn't have a safety plan, but the region does. So the Council of Governments completed a regional safety plan. This is a transportation safety plan at the beginning of, it was adopted in January of 2021. And since this is brand new, not everybody can figure out what's eligible yet, but the COG is looking into whether the regional safety plan would qualify all the towns, including Groton, as having a safety plan. You have to have a safety plan to apply for Safe Streets for All funding. Now, it's possible that the community connectivity study that Mark is going to be managing would allow for the development of a safety plan. So this would be a transportation safety plan. And we just look at, it would assess all the conditions on the roads and sidewalks in town and recommend improvements. And with that plan, then Groton would be eligible for these funds. And this is quite a bit of money that could go to projects recommended by the master plan. So that's all a little bit in flux. The folks at the COG are looking into it. They've told me they're very excited about this. They see a great opportunity for towns in the region to receive funding from this pot of money. So that's what I've just learned in the last day or two about this. And thank you, Andre, for sending out that article, because I missed it. And but I've been able to reach out to the COG and get some input from them, and to learn that they're very excited and they think this is a great opportunity. One of several funding sources that the town could take advantage of up in the next year or two.
And Brian, actually, I'm sure a lot of folks on this call would be able to answer. The Council of Governments classifies as a metropolitan planning organization, correct?
That's right.
So it's my understanding that cities, subdivisions, such as, Groton Long Point in the city of Groton, cities, towns, municipalities, MPOs, tribal organizations, they can apply for those funds directly. However, the state DOTs cannot. These improvements wouldn't be for state roads per se, but exclusively for some of our local arterials. That are. I don't know whether that you may be right. My hope is that if Groton were to apply for a certain amount of funding, that it would allow perhaps some of that funding to apply to a state road. If, for example, we have a trail crossing a state road, that we would be able to implement a safe crossing. But those are the details that are really in the minutia of the grant applications and the guidelines, and I don't think those are out yet. So we're all just waiting to find out.
Yeah, Brian, the notice of funding did come out this past Monday. I actually attended a webinar a couple of weeks ago on this Safe Streets for All. And you're right. The emphasis was to create this action plan. I mean, you're calling it a safety plan, but the feds are calling it an action plan. And then it's an 80-20 split. The feds will pay 80, the town has to kick in 20%, which is pretty typical for a federal grant. And then once you get that action plan, which and it's very detailed in this notice of funding, so I haven't had a chance to go through it, but I'd be interested to see if the COGS plan would fall into that. But then you can start in subsequent years, doing your implementation. And they're looking at fairly large projects. I mean, they're talking about, minimum project sizes like $5 million. So they're not talking about putting in a few sidewalks here and there. They're looking for, fairly substantial projects.
We have some work to do.
Yeah. But it's, yeah, it's like a 50-page document here to go through on all the details of it. But yeah, you're right. They're very clear at the webinar that they were not funneling this money through the DOTs. It was coming directly to the towns and cities, which is kind of unusual. And it's a good thing for us, I think. So, once I digest all this stuff, I'll probably, get with John, and we'll probably bring it to the council and see, how we proceed with it.
It's a good thing, but it also puts the burden of applying for the grant, writing the grant on the town.
Yeah.
And that has been a challenge for the town in this category, in my experience here for the last 20 years, that it's hard to dedicate the resources to preparing these grants, because these grants they're large and they're detailed, and they require a lot of information and data. And in many communities have a grant writer on staff, or hire a grant writing consultant, because their staff just can't dedicate the time that it takes to put these together. And you can just hear from what Greg is looking at, a multi-page document that's going to be a serious effort to put together a grant. But the towns that can, or the municipalities that can put it together and make a compelling application are the ones that get the money. That's where, we need to figure out how we can be how we can support the town's work in this direction.
I have a question about how the money gets doled out. Is that, based on safety plan or action plan, or the safety action plan, whatever these things really are, is this come out to be a list of actual projects?
Yeah,
If
I
so,
think it's very data driven, that they look at the data for accidents, pedestrians, bicyclists, cars throughout the town. And then they create an action plan of like, yes, this intersection needs this work, and that type of thing. There's
Okay,
definite projects that come out of it.
all right. So given that, the other question about how they dole out the money is this, how important is this scale? I mean, it's one thing to come up with an action plan and we have $42 million worth of stuff to do. Can we please have $1 million, as opposed to here's $1 million project and here's a $2 million project, here's a $5 million project. That comes back to my Navy training, is that you make sure you've got projects waiting that are all different scales. So when you get wind somehow of, hey, there's going to be $5 million left, you can put up your hand and say, I got one of those shovel-ready projects, as they're always looking for that term. And it's not up, it fits exactly what they're trying to do. And maybe it's a matter of not applying for one grant, but the effort it takes to do one grant is almost identical to the effort it takes to do 10 grants if they're all the same thing, just plugging in different facts and numbers. So is that worthwhile to do? Still need to come up with projects.
Yeah, I think, the action plan will identify, various size projects, I'm sure. And then there'll be, there's usually multiple grant sources but this one specifically aimed at streets, and they, in the documentation, it references having a complete street policy, with towns. It's, as part of the grant application, that, certainly they would give you, extra checks for that.
It seems we might be able to at least have an opportunity when we go through. It's very easy to say, is this problem this one intersection, or is this problem 3 intersections is the problem? It's whatever we identify it as the problem. And to make sure that we've got, our list isn't just a list of individual $1 million projects that we can bunch up, but to get the best bang for our buck, make sure we've got a 1 million, a 2 million, a 5 million, 10 million, whatever it takes to make sure that whatever money comes out, we've got one of those. But it has to do with how we're bundling it, because we'll come up with a list. I'm not sure how we do that, but we'll come up with a laundry list of intersections. And it just doesn't want to be a long laundry list of intersections. I'm not sure how interested people are going to want to see that. They want to see, what can you fix? I can fix just that intersection, or just that crossing, or can I fix, well, I think the state's taking care of Allen Street and exit 89, or they think they are. I'm not quite sure what's exactly happening there.
Yeah, that's still in the works.
Yeah, maybe.
Couple more years.
I think that the result of the master plan, the bike and pedestrian master plan part of, and the complete street part of the community connectivity study that Mark will be undertaking soon, is that corridors of facilities will be identified. So it won't just be intersections. I mean, the intersections may be the pinch points or the areas with the most conflict or with the most record of crashes and injury and that sort of thing. I mean, they tend to be where these conflicts occur. But it's the connections between those places, and it's even the off-road facilities that play into this overall system that will be eligible. So really, we'll be looking at a much larger network as eligible for grant funding, and that we'll be able to divide it into phases and into projects very easily. Once that overall plan is done, there will be an overall cost estimate associated with its different scales. So there's a network scale, there's an individual corridor scale, and then there's intersections and crossing scales. And it won't be difficult to bundle the different parts of the project into whatever size and funding amount the grant we're looking at will provide for. So I don't think that's an issue at all. I think the town will be in position to apply for this to the maximum amount. One question will be whether the connectivity study is done in time to meet the requirements of the first round of funding. And Greg, do you have any deadlines published that you've seen yet?
Yeah, September 15th, it has to be in by for this year. So it's an annual thing. They're gonna,
it's a multi-year program.
Yeah, it's a 5-year program.
Yeah. That doesn't mean we can't perhaps find a way to apply for a grant this year, especially if the COGS action plan, safety plan, qualifies us to at least, opens the door for us to at least make an application.
Mm-hmm.
Tom Olson here from the Conservation Division. I'm looking at the online, the transportation.gov grants section that describes the details of this, and Greg is correct on the September 15th deadline. But one of the things here is who's eligible for the grant funding is the Metropolitan Planning Organization, which would be CCOG. Have anybody talked to CCOG to see if they're interested in kind of doing a joint thing? And we would just put our laundry list in there rather than us preparing an individualized grant. If CCOG was to, they have grant more horsepower behind it, and if we were able to put our stuff in and get some money here funded for and make this the September deadline for 22, I think there's quite a laundry list here of implementation. There's two kinds of grants. There's two phases of the grants. One is development of the documentation, but there's also an act for the implementation grants. And that's where I think we're pretty much there as a CCOG, and we would just contribute our laundry list per se. I think we can put a laundry list together. I don't think we can put a full grant together, but if CCOG was to be submitting it and doing the grant writing per se, I think there's an opportunity here in the next 3 months here to get that information to them, and I think that's something that we need to be proactive about if we want to provide a kind of a kickoff to getting this process moving rather than just talking about it. Thank you.
To answer your question, I've been in touch with the transportation planner at the COG, and as recently as this afternoon, an email from them states that the grant program is a source of funding for the action plan. If the regional plan doesn't qualify, the first thing that we possibly could do is to apply for funding for an action plan. So that's one first step. Another is that that they're not sure if they are actually eligible themselves. But that if a project is applied that is a multi-jurisdictional project, so that would be Stonington and Groton, for example, applying for a grant, that kind of project may be even more competitive than just in a single town. So we really need to be thinking outside of our borders as well. And that project that I mentioned earlier, the Eastern Shoreline Path, is one of these multi-jurisdictional projects that could be highly eligible for this kind of a grant. And it's large enough that it would meet the $5 million threshold. And the COG is in negotiation with an engineering consultant to do the early planning feasibility study for the Eastern Shoreline Path. So we may have an opportunity for something like that.
Thank you.
So in the interest of time, I think
Yeah.
we can wrap up this this meeting in just a few minutes. I think we've covered everything on our agenda. And last meeting we held it to about held the meeting to about an hour. So I'd like to do the same and very much thank town staff for coming out on a to this meeting. Obviously, as I mentioned in our previous meeting, you have other boards and commissions to attend to in your evening hours, and especially now with the budget season still starting to wrap up now with RTM. Your evenings have been very busy, so thank you for joining us again. And I would like to read a note into the record. I was emailed a letter from a resident in just my capacity as a counselor, and I shared that I would told her I'd share the email with this group because we are looking at these issues, and it's just something to think about. We don't obviously have to make a decision, but I'll just read it here. Town Council, I am writing to you to address an ongoing and very dangerous situation that my neighborhood has had to deal with for several years. Now that our neighborhood has changed and more children have moved into the neighborhood, it has brought this problem to the surface. At approximately 2:08 Monday through Friday, when Grasser Tech School ends their day, our neighborhood is their shortcut to Route 117. We have had cars reaching at least 60 miles an hour, if not faster, down Quarry Road. I'm having the town police come down to my house today to make a complaint, and I'm hoping that a speed trap will be set up. But this doesn't solve the ongoing issue for our neighborhood. I think the time is now to have speed bumps put into our neighborhood. I do not want to write you after someone has to lose their life. Someone has lost their life. Please take that into consideration. Our neighborhood is truly at risk. Thank you, Tammy Del Cruz. And I would simply note that, it shouldn't, obviously no one should be driving 60 miles an hour on a local road. That's a given. That's the definition of insanity. But it shouldn't take a police officer or a speed trap to slow people down. The road should be designed in a way that doesn't encourage that type of driving. And obviously this is a local side road that runs parallel with Route 1. But I asked this group, what would make the most sense? Would it be the speed bumps? Would it be a redesign of the road? And those are, there are no answers, right? There is no right answer or wrong answer. Maybe everyone has their different opinion or expertise on the topic to inform their decision. But, I asked that because there are so many stories just like that all across Groton. Just my conversations with people about, especially now since the pandemic, how, really the travel speeds and, folks are just driving at much faster speed than I think before the pandemic. And the statistics back it up just in terms of the accidents and the loss of life, in our communities due to, motor vehicles being used as weapons really against people. And so I would ask, for just, folks, I'm not worried about anyone in this group, but slow down and be aware of your surroundings, because if you really do drive 60 miles on a local road, you're putting lives at risk. And anybody is welcome to that's my last word, but if anybody has any, are welcome to chime in.
But one thing is make sure that that type of complaint really needs to go to the Traffic Control Commission, which is chaired by the town manager and the chief of police, because they're the ones that really take those kind of complaints. Is that I've heard those, as I read the minutes of that group, which meets very infrequently, in my opinion, compared to the number of complaints we have. I'm really kind of disappointed in that, in the progress, because of the lack of regularity. I think they meet quarterly, but I think there's a lot more issues out there that they could be taking on rather than. It's good for us to know about them from a complete streets perspective, but I think the real issue here, taking a look at these guys are cutting through that subdivision, coming out, and stuff, and that's really a traffic control issue at this point, rather than a complete streets necessarily on how to get traffic through a residential area.
We are going to have a huge overlap between what is traffic control and what is complete streets. It's just, they meld so much. So I agree, we wouldn't be the body to take that kind of complaint on. But anything we'd come up with would be the traffic committee. So I'm not even sure where one starts and the other ends. And I agree, they should be meeting constantly. Just in my capacity, my limited capacity at Subbase, I'd have something from the CO coming to me every 2 weeks about, can you fix this? Can you fix that? We'd constantly be doing things. So I don't know how the whole town gets by just meeting very infrequently. And speed bumps comes up to be one of the things. By the way, never say speed bump again. We're so
Speed humps.
1950s. We do speed humps. Thank you very much. We don't want to punish people for going slowly. We want to punish people from going fast. So there's traffic calming and speed humps. So that's the terms we want to go for.
Yeah, and traffic calming is part of complete streets.
That's correct.
Like you said, it all dovetails together.
Excellent. Well, I have nothing else. Brian, do you have anything?
Really, except just to say that as part of the Complete Streets Policy Master Plan, references are made to standards by organizations like ASHTO and NACTO, and they publish traffic calming guidelines that a community can gradually incorporate into their neighborhoods that can slow traffic down. There's a phrase that is called self-enforcing streets, self-enforcing speed control, where the design of the street has a calming effect. So it may be narrowing the lanes and chicaning the travel from one side to another, or just choking it down in certain places. Even on-street parking can have a calming effect. I mean, just look at downtown Mystic, where the lanes are narrow and cars are parked on both sides. You don't see people driving 60 miles an hour, at least I never have, through downtown Mystic. So there are techniques, and we wouldn't be breaking new ground by employing any of those techniques to calm traffic. So it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight, but it's good to know about the areas that are the hot spots, like this particular cut through, because they can be prioritized. They should be prioritized. A place like that should get the attention before a neighborhood where there is no pattern of speeding. That's all I have to say.
All right. Well, with that, I think we can conclude the meeting. Let's shoot for 2 weeks from now. It seems like we're on a kind of every two week schedule, unless that's too soon. I'll defer to the group on that.
That's fine.
Sounds good to me. And I'll reach out to Bob Shea from Portland, Connecticut, and ask him if he might be available for, say, 10 or 15 minutes at our next meeting. Or if not that meeting, the meeting after, There's also a public works director that I know well from New Britain, Mark Moriarty, who has probably the most applicable experience in the state of Connecticut. And I can ask him if he would be available to one of our future meetings as well. I think it'd be very helpful to hear from folks like that who have experienced a complete streets process for a number of years.
Cindy?
I would just suggest that we make sure that we get on board whoever we intend to have on board for that meeting, so that we don't have to kind of recreate the language that we're going to be using, and that we can come to an understanding of what we're doing. So, just kind of off the top of my head, somebody from the schools, somebody from the police department, we've got public health and park and rec, somebody from maybe from the seat bus company, a merchant, or somebody from the business community, somebody that is an advocate for individuals with disabilities. I mean, there's think about who you want to have on this group, so that we can start to come together and learn together.
That's a great suggestion, and maybe we can tag team some of the brainstorming, Cindy, on maybe identifying who some of those people are. But I'd be happy to take the lead on that.
Yeah, and maybe even the public works director from Portland, kind of in the meantime, while we're setting this meeting up and inviting him, maybe he can also be asked for suggestions in terms of who should participate.
Absolutely. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I'll see you in 2 weeks, if not sooner. Thank you again, Greg, Mark, and Deb, for joining us this evening. And have a good night.
All right.
Great, thanks.
Yeah,
Good
thank
night.
you.
Everybody, thank you.
Take
All
care.
right.